I've gotten most of my photo etch parts glued on. Here's an example. So it's off to prime and paint now with the base champagne gold color. So the videos you're gonna see coming up on that, if you look really closely, you'll notice it's of a version of this model where I have not put the photo etch down, but I already shot the video and the workflow is the same, so I'm going to use that video. They're from this model where I first did the paint job, and then I glued the photo etch down, and then I did the drilling. And you might be able to tell from here, you know, the photo etch obviously took a little bit of a beating from that workflow, which is what I've changed now by pre-drilling the holes. So ignore that. You probably, I don't know if you'd see it or not anyway, but the videos you're about to see regarding the paint workflow are actually of this model before the photo etch is down, but I'm going to do the same workflow with these pieces with the photo etch down. Except, well, I don't know, I'll probably lay down the adhesion promoter too, because there'll still be plenty of plastic, or some plastic showing anyway. The next step is going to be to paint the outsides of the components. Now, one of the decisions you have to make on building any model is when to paint. You know, do you paint the individual pieces? Do you make components like the nacelles, the body, and the saucer and paint those? Or do you build the entire model and then paint? And of course, like everything, it just depends. But I find on this model, well, for example, the nacelles, you just have to paint these beforehand, because there is a clear piece that gets sandwiched in between. We're going to paint this one blue, by the way, but a clear piece that gets sandwiched in between these, and masking that off, well, it just seems like it would make more work than it's worth. So, for example, I will go ahead and actually paint these, but paint pre-paint all the components in gold into the base color beforehand. And you know, so then in the future, when you have, you know, seams that need work or whatever, you're gonna have to do some touch-up. But for this particular model, it seems to make sense to paint the pieces individually beforehand, and then do any little bit of touch-up that you need to do at the end. It just seems to be a more logical and better way to approach this particular model. And normally I use pretty much just airbrush, but Tamiya makes a couple golds. This one's called Champagne Gold, which I think is going to be the right one. They also make a titanium gold. I got both cans just for, you know, this is kind of molded in the correct color. You can see it's probably going to be that champagne. But anyway, so what we'll do is we'll prime each of these pieces, wet sand it down, prime it again, you know, get at least 2 coats of primer. Oh, and I forgot to mention actually adhesion primer. So let's talk a little bit about that. I said adhesion primer, I mean adhesion promoter. So there's a few products out there. You can get them online or at automotive supply stores, automotive parts stores. Here is Duplicolor's plastic adhesion promoter, and this is made for you know, car plastics, to make sure that when you paint over them it sticks. When you're building your model, one of the worst things that can happen is you've got things painted, especially if you're doing your component parts obviously beforehand. You're going to be taping a lot typically, and then you pull off that tape and it pulls off a piece of your paint. It can create pretty hard to fix area. So it's a good order of work to just go ahead and use this adhesion promoter as part of your workflow on your model. And their instructions are on it, but typically you spray 3 coats of it about 3 minutes apart, and then on the third coat you want to lay down your primer, your first coat of primer on it within about 3 minutes is the way that works. So for example, what we'll do is on these parts we'll put them all, tape them all to a board, do 3 coats of adhesion promoter, and then do 1 coat of primer, probably use just Tamiya's white primer on these. Probably sand it down with very fine grit, probably 1200 grit wet dry sandpaper. Put on another coat or 2 of primer, sand between the coats, and we'll work through this, but just to let you know where we're going. And then that'll give us our base then for a couple coats of the paint. So let me go tape all these guys up and we'll get started. It's not a bad idea before putting anything on the plastic. You've already washed it, as you recall, with that Dawn liquid, but take a little piece of 600 or higher grit sandpaper. The higher the number, the finer the grit. This particular little piece is 800. I think I've got them going up to like 2,000. And yeah, just give it a little coating. If you remember on this one, I had made a bit of a mistake here anyway. I had started cutting these guys out up here. So I just took some 800 grit sandpaper, smooth that out, and I'll smooth it out, and you'll never see it. Between paint and then this whole model gets covered in decals anyway, that mistake will be covered up. But this is a good idea just because the adhesion promoter will stick even better to just slightly roughed surface. So I would recommend just lightly sanding your model before starting putting the coatings on. Here's the main parts taped onto a piece of cardboard, ready for the adhesion promoter, then the primer, and then the paint. You can see I've masked off some areas that might be getting glue. So this is a snap together model, and it really fits very well and very tightly. On the original one I did, I hardly used any glue on it at all. On this one, I'm anticipating some tight squeezes, at least on these pieces, with respect to the lighting. And so I suspect I'm going to need to use some model cement on these pieces. So just as a precaution, I've gone ahead and taped out where cement might go. A lot easier to mask this off now and have it all clean than to paint everything, and then you have to come back with a Q-tip and acetone and take it off on those parts. So I've decided to just mask it off beforehand. So I think these are ready to go. We'll go start getting them adhesion promoted, primed, and painted. I ran some test shots of the 2 options for the base colors, the champagne gold or the titanium gold by Tamiya, and I think it's champagne, and I think that's what most people say it is. It's a silver, a more silver kind of gold, kind of a silver gold mix. This is the titanium, and it's more traditional gold. I laid this over the white primer I'm going to use, but this is the champagne gold, and I compared it to the stickers on the ship as well as to the box art, and it definitely. We will go with the champagne gold. I'm going to go ahead and spray on the adhesion promoter. So we'll do 3 coats of this about 3 minutes apart, and then after you do the third coat you have about 10 minutes in which to put your next coat on, which in my case that'll be the Tamiya primer. So let's start with the first coat of adhesion promoter. You're about 8 to 10 inches from the model. Just kind of a light spray across the top. No magic to it. I'll do that 2 more times. Then put on the primer coat, the first primer coat. Probably do 2 others after that. And then I'll check back after that first primer coat's on. I have 3 coats of the adhesion promoter now down. Took only, what, 10 minutes or so. 3 minutes between coats. They've been here about 3 or 4 minutes now, and I'll go ahead and put on the first coat of primer. The next step in my workflow is to wet sand the prime surface. I wait about 10 minutes, let it dry. If you're not familiar with wet dry sandpaper, it's awesome stuff. You just get a little bowl of water, your wet dry sandpaper. This is 800 grit. I find that something between 600 and 800 is usually a good starting point. On my last coat, I'll probably also do 1,000 and 1,200, maybe even as much as 2,000. Really fine grit for the final prime coat. This is the first prime coat though. Just wet it down and just lightly sand across. And back, if you've used just kind of regular sandpaper in the past, you know that it's just not very good for very long. The grit stuff just gets caught up there in the sandpaper. Here it just slides right off. You just put it there. You keep a little rag nearby to wipe off the water. Be careful, you've got little nubs and protrusions. You don't want to take off too much. It looks like I may use even a finer grit than this. Looks like it's taking off. I'm trying to be super light, but being pretty aggressive on the edges. And that's okay, because it's going to get another, at least 2 more coats. I like to shoot for 3. Seems like an ideal number, but obviously you've got to do 1 more because if something went wrong, you over sanded or something, no problem. Can't really have too much primer on here. You've just got a nice smooth surface ready to take a second coat of primer. So mostly, obviously, this video is going to be about building this model, but I'm working outside as you can tell, so I thought I'd show you my chickens. I've got the second coat of primer on, and as you can tell, this model is really detailed. A lot of detail in it. And so I'm going to switch from the wet dry sandpaper to steel wool for sanding down the second coat. I'll just for grins do a third coat. This model is going to be covered in the photo etch and in stickers, or not stickers but decals, so there probably won't be a lot of this visible, but it'll give me a chance to show you my workflow and a good workflow for you. And you know, like anything, it's better to do things right. The more thorough you do them at the outset, the less problems later. there's my timer telling me it's been 10 minutes since I put on that second coat. So I'll go ahead and steel wool down these guys and get them ready for a third coat. By the way, you notice I'm working outside. You know, if I've got a large spray job, in this case the pieces are small, but there's a number of them, and especially for the prep stuff, like for example, if I got dust onto this, I would just be sanding it off right here at this stage anyway. And so that way you're not breathing the fumes, you're not making the house smell. And then with respect to the steel wool, it loves sending these little pieces of steel wool everywhere. And boy, you get that around your spray booth or what have you, and it'll live with you for months. So if you're going to steel wool stuff, I definitely recommend doing that outside, doing it away from any area that you're spraying or painting. It doesn't take much to get these smoothed out, nice and glossy. These are ready now for the third coat of primer. So they'll end up with 6 coats of product on them before we've even started painting, which may seem kind of overkill for this little model, especially again when you consider it's going to be covered in photo etch parts and in decals. But I find, you know, find your workflow that works best for you, and you can always add to your workflow, but don't subtract from your workflow generally. If it works for you, I'd say stay with it. For example, if 3 coats of primer are overkill, 2 would have done the trick. These look pretty good as is right now. It just doesn't hurt. You've got it all set up, you're working. Why not go ahead and add that 3rd coat and prevent problems later? So that's the final coat, as long as no dust or hairs gets on this. So far I've been lucky. If something comes on, no problem. I'll just sand it off and give one more coat to that particular piece. And since we're going to spray paint these, normally from here I'd go to the airbrush booth, but we're going to spray paint these, so I'll probably just do that out here too. So let these dry. I will give them a final little sand down with the steel wool. I think they'll be ready for paint. Now for the fun stuff. We get to hit these guys with our first coat of champagne gold. Alright, let's let that dry for 10-15 minutes and do that again twice. I'm really happy with the way this champagne gold turned out. It's probably more towards silver than gold, so call it silver with a touch of gold. I think the color works really well. And the Discovery itself has done this, the bridge area and the bridge leading to the bridge, as it were, copper or brass. I think it's going to be more copper. And then the inner rings on the top surface look like they're copper. The decals definitely cover this, but I think we're going to go ahead and just paint those copper just to have the copper backing. There's also some copper accents on the nacelles and across here. I know the decals cover this. I'll check on the nacelles. I may just back paint them copper anyway since I'm doing it. And then on the bottom, this pattern gets, let's see if we can do this, kind of reversed with the copper rings. So I'm masking off to go ahead and paint those copper rings. There's Tamiya makes this nice kind of contour tape, I think they call it, and it's good for masking areas. You see, I've already kind of masked off this inner circle. I'll just throw some cheap blue tape or something around this part, and so you just get it started, and it really bends really well. You get the idea. I won't walk you through the whole thing, but we'll mask off these two areas. On the bottom, we'll mask off the appropriate areas, and I'll need to pop this little guy with some primer and just paint him copper. I'll most likely use copper on these. And so let me finish masking off, and once we're putting down the copper, I'll come back. I've finished masking off this piece. Tamiya makes these tapes here in all kinds of different widths that are just great for when you have to go along contours like you do here. Here on this piece, we've got a little bit of subtle copper in these four pieces here, so I've taped the inside, and of course this ring and this ring here. So I've taped the inside here, outside I guess here, and I'm just going to use this a liquid masking film. Sorry about the light here, guys, but anyway, it's a liquid masking film. I could use tape, it just seems like a, you know, on this I can just put a little liquid mask in each of those, and that'll take care of it. And then we'll paint up the copper. I went ahead and shot a couple shots of the adhesion promoter on the bridge piece. Probably overkill, but what the heck. And then I shot a couple shots of primer on top of that, and we'll paint this piece up copper. This is a very small piece, probably overkill. You could probably get away with just painting it straight, but again, better safe than sorry, so why not? This liquid mask is just the consistency of rubber cement, basically, and you just put it in places where you don't want paint to take. and where you've got this fine detail, works out really pretty well. And it just dries on there and creates a little coat, and after you're done painting you just rub it right off. I have most of our masking done for the copper. I noticed I did this last night and it looks like some of the tape lifted off overnight, so we'll clean that up, get it back down. But we got our first, we have our first photo etch parts here, part number 55, that'll go in here. Normally I anneal my photo edge. This is obviously just a small flat oval shaped part, so no reason to. We'll just cut it out and glue it down here before we run copper on this stuff. Certainly on these other pieces that are going to bend, we'll anneal them, so we'll talk more about annealing your photo edge in a little bit. Use some canopy glue here with a little brush. Okay, just to confirm, I think our correct color is copper. Here's two Vallejo metallics. The left one's copper, the right one's brass. The brass is pretty close to the actual base color. The copper seems spot on for at least the box art. So I'm going to go ahead and use the copper. This paint I'm using is called Model Air. It's supposed to be for airbrush, but I find that you really do need to thin it down. If you use it straight, it clogs up your airbrush almost immediately. You'll get a few sprays in and then nothing will come out. So I do 50-50 of the paint to the Vallejo airbrush thinner. 1, 2, 3, oops, don't forget to shake. Always shake your paint beforehand. So we'll count from here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20-ish. start there. Probably have to refill, I'm sure, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. That's about right. So let's put a little bit more paint. So probably 2/3 paint to 1/3 thinner. Let's try and go with that. Stir up. Fire up here. Test shot. Oh, turn on your compressor. Then take a test shot. We'll do this in a few layers. Always be patient. I'll let this dry and then knock out just another layer or two. Almost forgot the bridge pieces. Knock those out too. Just work in layers, a little drying time between each, so you don't get, you know, from the air, when your airbrush streaking, messing it up. A little bit of an awkward piece because it has two areas where it connects, and so I may have to go back with some acetone and take off some paint wherever I want the glue to go. Does dry for a bit. Mix up a little bit more paint and thinner, and I'll add another few coats to everybody, and we should be done with the copper. Since I have the airbrush out, I'm going to go ahead and knock out at least the blue clear parts, or at least the nacelles blue clear parts. These are the ones that get sandwiched between the upper and lower parts of the nacelle. In the past on clear blue, I've used this Model Air Light Sea Blue. It's a little bit baby bluish for my taste. This is a little light testing I've done on a different model of it, but it gives you an idea of the type of blue. So I think today I'm going to try this Tamiya Clear Blue X23. Give that a shot. I've not used that one before. I'm going to lightly sand or steel wool these so they'll transmit light better, hold the paint better. I've marked the number, their parts 104 and 105 on these little sticks. Of course you can figure it out. I mean, you can figure which fits or doesn't, but it just makes life easier later if you've got your parts marked, in my opinion. So again, I'm going to lightly sand these down and then spray them with this Tamiya Clear Blue. Let's see how that looks. Okay, I've cleaned the copper out of the airbrush, ran a little airbrush cleaner through it, and then we'll do 2/3 paint on the Tamiya and a third thinner. Again, I try to stay within the same brand. You have less compatibility issues, hopefully no compatibility issues if you're staying in the same brand. So we won't need very much here. I don't know, I'll count out, just to keep the math simple, maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, oops, it's 7, 8, 9, call it 9 drops. Oops, and also I should have started with the thinner and then the paint. So then you can just use one little, those little pipe guys to get it out. Grab another one here. They come in huge packs, so we got plenty, but don't want to waste if I don't have to. So we did roughly 9 drops there. Do 3 drops of thinner. 1, 2, 3. Let's start there. Stir it up. You probably know, but you want your paint basically to have the consistency of milk for it to run through the airbrush. Let's clear these guys off of our little stand. They should be dry by now. Ready. Put on a glove. Fire up this guy. Oh, and I've sanded. I just lightly scuff this up with the steel wool. Again, I think paint will stick to it a little better, but also you want to frost your clear parts generally. Obviously not like a canopy or something that light shining through. You want to frost so it diffuses that light a bit. You don't get that hard LED glare. Test your paint, make sure it's coming out alright. Actually, this looks about as light as the other one, but maybe it just is what it is. I have to confess, math is not my strong point. I probably said something like 9 drops of paint and 3 drops of thinner. I guess that really should have been 6 drops of paint, 3 drops of thinner. I'm not sure. But anyway, the 9 drops and the 3 worked fine. I mixed up a second batch, and I'm really liking this blue. I layered a whole bunch of layers. Obviously, each one gets thicker, and I think this blue is a lot better than, although maybe not super fair because this was literally just one layer, but still it was a lot lighter blue than this Tamiya clear blue. So I'm happy with that color, and I think this will work really good for the nacelles, both when they're off. It's a very nice dark blue, and of course when it's lit with blue LED lighting it, should work out perfectly. Again, since I have the airbrush out, next I'm going to tackle the front of the nacelles. As you can see from the box art, it's really supposed to be 3 distinct points of light, and then the rest of the clear piece is painted in that copper. When I did my original build, I left it all blue, so one of the things I wanted to correct this go around was to just have those 3 pinpoints of light. The pieces are a clear piece, you can see them there. So what we'll do is we'll just hand brush in the blue 3 dots, then we'll mask that off and then spray the whole unit copper, and we should get there. Here's our final painted saucer sections, top and bottom, masked off just fine. Bridge sections are all copper. The tops of the nacelles with their copper insets, as it were. Our 2 side pieces for the nacelles. These will go in the front, and these will go in the back, the thrusters. Did those in a clear red, clear Tamiya red. Didn't even have to thin that one down, it worked just fine in the airbrush. I've got my little dots, and also on the front deflector dish, just making really sure those dry completely, and then I'll mask them off with little dots of masking fluid and paint the rest of the clear part gold. And finally, these are the insets to the bridge pieces, and I will spray some dull coat on the inside to frost those.
One quick correction before we leave the paint segment. I think I may have said on these ends of the nacelles about painting them gold. They're actually copper. So you see the 3 blue clear window insets that kind of light up, and then the piece itself, the rest of it is copper.